Take us away, Anne.
Okay. We're just at that time of the session where every 5 minutes is completely different from the previous 5 minutes, and there's so many things going on and so many amendments and new bills are still arriving that we're having to deal with. And we'll talk about at least one of those bills tonight. So it's crazy. And JP, I see you on here, and you remember this time of the session as we're getting closer to April, and suddenly committees are getting closer to the end of their workload, and the trading and the negotiating that has to go on at this time it's demanding. And so if you know a legislator and you like them, thank them. That's all I can say. Because they are working really hard, and it is getting to the point where it's a pressure cooker in the Capitol. So we really appreciate the fact that people are willing to run for office and tolerate that. It can be rough. I know Andrea Olson had a rough morning this morning. If anybody knows Andrea Olson, she's a senator from Missoula, who is just fantastic on pushing for the rights of individuals and for freedom and democracy. And the committee chair, Barry Usher, clearly has disliked her all session. And they had a rough morning because he wanted to do executive action. He wanted to take a vote on a very complex wildfire bill that they just heard yesterday. And none of the amendments were ready. And they got in a big match. They did not take executive action because the amendments weren't ready. Anyway, if anyone knows Andrea, please reach out and tell her thank you because she really is doing really hard work in that Senate Judiciary Committee. But other than that, let's go. So MEPA and DERF, DERF and I will tag team this. That's what we've been doing with these MEPA bills all session. It's rough. MEPA is not going to look the way it did prior to the session. There's definitely a lot of legislators who have it in for MEPA based upon the Held decision. There is a serious misperception on, first off, what the court did, what its decision was, and what the state's defense entailed. They're wrong, thinking that the state did everything right and the court just didn't listen to the state. It's pretty shocking misperception of reality. But that case has resulted in these MEPA bills, and we hear about it every single time there's a hearing. The best MEPA bill is still HB 270, which is Katie Zolnikoff's bill. Very simple clarification, striking language that the court found to be unconstitutional. This bill has come out of committee, was voted, I think it was unanimously. No, only, yeah, anyway, there was one vote against it. And that was more of a joke than anything else. But then this bill just got pulled back into committee instead of having second reading. So we're trying to figure out what's happening and why. But if you want to call your senator and ask them to support this bill, that's a good idea. Next slide. Durf, do you want to talk about the first two?
Absolutely. These are the big two bad MEPA bills that we are going to have a really hard time killing. And one of them is currently sitting in the Senate and one is in the House. So HB 285 has moved onto the Senate, been transmitted, and SB 221 is now in the House. They do different things, but the end result is that MEPA is going to be, really impacted. HB 285 really sort of eliminates not just the constitutional requirement, or I guess the constitutional satisfaction that's required of the legislature by implementing the Constitution, MEPA implementing the Constitution, but it also sort of waters down the cumulative impacts analysis and the historic analysis and attempts to turn MEPA into that dreaded paper exercise that we're concerned about. Make it all process and take all the teeth out of it. And then SB 221 is the fence line one that will basically narrow the assessment of greenhouse gases to just environmental impacts that are, or emissions that are within the fence line of a permit. So if you have a coal mine that's mining coal, we're not going to look at the combustion of that coal, just the generators and the drag lines and the trucks combusting diesel, which dramatically reduces the overall numbers for how much pollution is being caused. These are going to be really tough to kill. And so we're working on different strategies. There's a lot of inside game right now. What I can tell you is that the bills are really conflicting. There's a huge number of sections in the various bills that are just like, well, they conflict. They're changing different sections in different ways, or in one bill they're leaving it, in the other bill they're changing it entirely, etc. So this isn't the end of the story, regardless of what happens. These bills are either going to have to be harmonized somehow in conference committee, or maybe one dies and the other one moves on. So there's some serious coordination that's going to have to occur. And not just with these two bills, but also with HB 270, which also has conflicting language. So that's a lot of what we're focusing on right now, is the sausage making. What's going to come out, and can we have any influence on the actual MEPA changes that are going to happen? And the actions listed are correct. Contact Senate Natural Resources and contact your rep.
Mm-hmm. And then the other bill, which is connected, is HB 291, and a number of you were on at the hearing yesterday. Thank you very much for doing that. This bill just says that the state can't have any regulation more stringent than the federal government. Just for background, the state right now can only have a regulation more stringent, an air quality regulation more stringent than the federal government, if it proves that it's necessary to protect public health, it's technologically and economically feasible, and a whole host of criteria. And that went into law in 1995. And the result of that is there's only been one time that the state of Montana has gone above federal standards, and that was to limit mercury emission from coal strip. And that regulation saved that people downwind from having an extra 2 tons of mercury in their air over a 5-year period. The coal strip plant was one of the most polluting in the nation, and certainly the most polluting in the state. When it came to mercury pollution, we adopted a standard that limited those emissions. And in the time it took for the federal government to play catch up, which took years, there was 2 tons, 4,000 pounds of mercury that was prevented from going into our air and water. So it is a good thing to be able to have the state go beyond federal when the federal government fails to do its job. But the purpose of this is to prevent the state from being able to adopt greenhouse gas regulations. No doubt about it. They don't want the state to adopt those regulations. They know the federal government is going to adopt any limits on greenhouse gases anytime soon, so they figure this buys them some time. So you can talk about a number of things when you text or send a message to your legislator on this bill, but basically we should have the right for self-determination. We should have the right to protect ourselves when the federal government doesn't. So that one, it's in Senate Natural Resources, had the hearing yesterday, and we'll probably have a vote either tomorrow or early next week.
Couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Easy one first. Will there be lawsuits if the bad MEPA bills go through?
Oh, yes. Yes, because people are going to continue to want to defend their rights, their the right to a clean, healthful environment, their property, their businesses, their water resources, their ability to catch fish in a stream. There's just so many benefits of MEPA that are going to be lost if these bills pass. And so, yes, people are going to continue to demand that their rights be met by government. So, yep, there will be lawsuits.
And then the other question is for Durf. Can you explain your answers discussion during the question session at the end of the HB 285 hearing yesterday?
Yeah, Kathy, can you remind me which question you're asking about? If you're
Yeah, I
there.
was confused about the it seemed like you were saying the Constitution really isn't at jeopardy with this law, and
Okay, yeah, so
I got confused about that.
Got it.
good question, and maybe I wasn't as clear as I could have been. So the Constitution, we have this fundamental right under Article 2, Section 3, which is, the right to a clean and healthful environment. And then in a different section of the Constitution, there's also a section that says that basically the legislature shall provide for the protection and enforcement of this duty. So the legislature actually has an affirmative duty to make sure that our environmental life support system is protected. And so the question was kind of like, if we remove the constitutional reference in MEPA, does it no longer provide for those constitutional protections? I don't think so, because the legislature has to do it anyway. Whether it's through MEPA or another thing, they have to provide those. And so the court's going to, one, say, well, this law exists, so it has to at least in part satisfy those constitutional requirements. And then two, also just thinking about the legislature can't really define what's constitutional and what's not. That's the job of the court system, our judiciary. And so whether they say it's constitutional or not, I think it doesn't necessarily matter. Of course, this is all very crystal ball, but that was the point I was trying to make. Does that make sense to you, Kathy?
Yeah, that helps. That helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
The legislature has to have a framework for implementing the Constitution. That's just part of the deal. And MEPA has been that framework for a long time. If you remove that framework, that doesn't negate the legislature's obligation to have a framework to implement the Constitution. It just says they don't have, what their decisions will be arbitrary and capricious. So, look at before the language was inserted in 2003 that said that our statutes like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, mining laws, that they all implement the Constitution. Prior to the legislature saying that, we won a court decision against the DEQ for its permitting of the 7-Up Peat joint venture mine, like the initial permits for that mine. We won that based upon the right to a clean and healthful environment. And it wasn't that the language existed that says this implements the Constitution. That hadn't been inserted yet. But the court went to that statutory framework and said, this is how the state's supposed to be implementing this constitutional right. And it's not. That framework is flawed. So, because it allowed more arsenic in the water. So it's not that it's just automatic that it no longer implements the Constitution, but that's absolutely what they're trying to do. If that made any more sense.
It's kind of like the legislature saying, well, this is a law that guarantees the right to free speech. That's not really their jurisdiction, responsibility, power. And that's where I think they're going to get tripped up.
Yep.
Water and climate bill. Okay. HB 587 is the material damage bill. This is the basically the bill that will decrease protections for water quality and quantity outside of coal mine permit boundaries. We dealt with this in 2023, and thankfully the U.S. Office of Surface Mining rejected those changes. We think they may also reject these changes, but here we are. This bill is now in Senate Natural Resources, and then there's a hearing coming up on the 4th. So I think that's Friday of next week. And this is one that we'd love for folks to turn out on and just argue for water quality protections. Because in addition to the enormous climate implications of coal mines, they just absolutely trash the water in eastern Montana. And so this is a really important, not just for water quality, but for the people that depend upon water quality and quantity, which are primarily ag users adjacent to coal mines. So there will be some of that certainly coming up in the hearing. And then the second one is HB 664. And this is the, yet again, an appeal of the numeric nutrient standard in Montana. And it passed, unfortunately passed the House on a pretty strong vote. I think that now that we're out of the House of Origin, we might get a better vote, but I'm pretty worried about this one, mostly because the state has zero plan for a replacement to the repeal of numeric standards. They don't have a narrative standard. And so this would really open things up to a lot of ambiguity in terms of what exactly is the standard, because EPA has to approve it, as well as, well, what are you going to do to replace it? And what are both industry and what are the citizens going to identify as the rule? It's going to be really confusing. This is a bad bill, just not just for environmental protections, but just process wise. It is not a good step forward. It's going to make things more confusing and cause a lot of litigation. So that's up Monday. Holy moly. Okay. That's up Monday. Better get my testimony ready in Senate Natural Resources. And the CDs are JP, cities and counties. What's the CDs?
Conservation district. Conservation
Oh.
district.
I don't think they actually took a position on it. The League of Cities and Towns opposed the repeal of the numeric standards in the House. I'm hoping that's going to be the same in the Senate, but they're getting a lot of pressure from industry. So I don't know where this is going to end up. This one's very much in flux at this point. And these are the three bad bills that are still alive as far as partisan judiciary is concerned. Because I can't remember if we mentioned it last week, but General Claims Court did fail to pass out of the Senate Finance and Claims. So it's sitting there right now. We're concerned about a potential blast motion on that bill. But for now, that bill is dead and tabled in Senate Finance and Claims. But the SB 42 is the worst of these, but they're all really, really problematic. And that one would require anybody who is running for a judicial seat, from your municipal court dealing with speeding tickets up to the Supreme Court, to declare a party on the ballot. And if they don't declare a party, they can run as an independent, but very much a problem. It actually passed the Senate and has a hearing, I think had a hearing this morning in House Judiciary. And that bill will absolutely go out of that committee. There's no stopping it. And so our focus on this bill is to try and kill it on the floor. I think it's very feasible to kill SB 42 on the House floor. And speaking with both legislators today, as well as some other lobbyists working on judicial stuff, this is probably one that we can stop. We have a list of legislators that do need to hear from you on SB 42 for that floor vote, which will probably be mid to late next week. So you have some time to do your outreach. these other ones are a little bit trickier because they're basically the same bill. They've just been introduced, one in the Senate and one in the House, and they allow for the chief of the Supreme Court and the associate justices of the Supreme Court to run under a partisan label and to identify as a partisan label if there's an appointment process with the governor. And so it's not the district court. And in speaking with people up there, it sounds like these they may be a little more welcome than some of the other bills. So these are going to be I think where the fight's going to be is basically making the Supreme Court, but not our district court, a partisan body. And so the House version sponsored by, I think it's Brandon Lair. I hope I have that correct. Has a hearing tomorrow morning, which I'll be watching. And then the Senate version was just introduced, so there's no hearing scheduled. But I would highly encourage folks to work on these two, HB 838 and SB 543, if you have some time, because I think these are going to be the vehicles for changing the dynamics of the Montana judiciary, especially with the governor's support, which really hurts things. So. And Shannon is in a committee hearing on lakeshore protection right now. And so
Laura, but yes.
Laura. Laura. And so I'm going to handle these real quick. What we have here are 4 different bills that we've decided are useful, that are good, that are small steps in terms of both trying to plan better and do a little bit more gentle density in our community. So SB 266 is a bill that is already sort of contemplated in the recent Land Use Planning Act, and some cities and towns have already allowed for this, such as Bozeman. But what it would do is basically allow in places where there's already single family housing and duplexes to allow for triplex and fourplex housing. A way to basically create some additional housing options for people and to try and discourage some of that sprawl and create a little bit more dense communities. HB 492, this one is a small tweak. We originally actually opposed HB 492 because it was too punitive as far as we're concerned over local communities and the ability to plan as far as parking is concerned. But it's been revised since then to basically tweak minimum parking requirements so that we can try to move towards a better, I guess, planning system where we don't have these overbuilt parking lots in commercial areas and some residential areas, but still trying to take into account impacts to other neighbors. So it was revised, and I'd have to go back and look at it, but it changed enough that we were satisfied that it was sort of an incremental step in terms of step towards trying to, have less parking and a little bit more opportunity for people to be closer to amenities, is what we were thinking. HB 764 is increased public transit opportunities. And I think that this is the Andrea Olson bill. Maybe not, because it's HB. And do you recall what?
Yeah, this is Representative Baum,
Oh.
BAUM, and this is for funding for the rail authority. The line that nobody's worked harder on than Dave Strohmeyer from Missoula. So it's just trying to get some money to keep this alive.
I was talking about the one above it, HB 764, which is increased public transit opportunities. I know that this is one that like both Mountain Line and the maybe it's Streamline Bus in Bozeman have been pushing for. And I think it's trying to improve public transit opportunities for larger communities. And touched on HB 848. I'm sorry that I don't know more details about these. I'm just doing the best I can, and Laura really is the expert here. So if you have questions about these, please do send an email to me and or Laura really, and she'll be able to answer any questions you might have.
And just to make it more complicated, 764, you should send an email to Laura. And on 848, you should send an email to Nick. That hearing was yesterday and Nick testified on it on 848. So they're pretty different, but both a good step in the right direction.
And there are a few there's quite a few bad land use bills that we're working on. HB 714, the land use family transfer exemption is probably the most abused exemption in the subdivision code that allows for you to basically transfer property to an immediate family member and to avoid having to go through subdivision review with quite a few less steps. And what we see is a lot of developers or even families are doing that, and then sort of immediately after the 2-year date selling it and avoiding having to go through subdivision review. And there's 2 bad subdivision bills, HB 714 and one other one. One of them would make it more difficult for municipalities to say no by basically requiring that in order for a city or town to say no, they have to prove intent, that there's an intent to evade, which is sort of a difficult standard. And the other one would broaden the number of immediate family members that are potentially that you could transfer property to make it a larger pool of applicants. And again, something you'll have to ask Laura. I don't know if it's like first, second, third cousins or what, but basically making more people basically available to do the family transfer to.
Grandchildren, grandparent,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
And then SB 358 is a bit of a sticky wicket, but right now we are very much opposed. This bill is the compromise bill that came out of the DNRC stakeholder process for it was an interim stakeholder process to try and resolve some of the issues over exempt wells. And this is the main bill that's come out of it. We have some problems with it, primarily in that it continues to allow for exempt wells unmitigated, even in red areas, provided that you demonstrate that it's going to be expensive or difficult to hook up to city water, which I think is a big loophole and is going to cause, there's going to be a lot of abuse of that particular loophole. And there's also going to be probably some significant changes tomorrow, such as stripping the water quality related considerations that were in the bill out tomorrow. They're doing a big executive action tomorrow, doing a bunch of changes. And there's a good chance that we're going to be lobbying pretty hard against it if they make a number of changes, including not fixing the exemption as well as taking out the water quality related considerations. So that's tomorrow afternoon. They're going to sort of decide the next phase of it. And depending upon that vote, we'll decide how hard we're going to try and kill it on the Senate floor. And SB 436 is the primary problem is that it maintains exempt wells. It actually is not as problematic in some ways, but it is a vehicle for mischief. And that's the biggest problem, is that it is the well drillers bill, and there's likely to be other things added to it in the process, especially if SB 358 dies. And so that's what we're concerned with. And so the exempt well discussion is really a moving target, and we're trying to identify the best path forward, which may be just trying to kill everything and going to the court system at this point, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite for saying no to unmitigated exempt wells, which is really what the law requires at this point. And that's where we're at.
Back to me. So there's a couple good things going on. SB 301 is a bill by Daniel Zolnikoff that started out being a bill that was going to allow Northwestern to get lickety split pre-approval from the PSC with very few sideboards. We strongly opposed it. We've been working on amendments to it. It is in good shape now. It's in the shape there where we're willing to support it. And what this bill does is it allows Northwestern to go to the commission, the PSC, and ask for permission, get a determination that the line, new transmission line is necessary. And then once the environmental review is done by DEQ, the commission can then approve that project in advance of it being built. But it retains the ability to disallow costs that are over the cost estimates or that were not prudently incurred. So we feel like this bill, we've been working with just about everybody except for Northwestern to make this bill work as a vehicle to try to encourage Northwestern to build some more transmission, which is much needed. And so I'm optimistic that this bill is going to stay good. But we'll see. We'll keep monitoring it throughout the process. It's just about done. It passed third reading today. Thank you, Ben. And so it's going to go off to the House Energy Committee, where, of course, everything is a little more difficult. SB 355 is along the same lines when it comes to transmission. And this bill is this weird thing. Utilities, a few utilities in 11 states have gotten statewide laws that give them something called the right of first refusal. It basically lets them box out any other developer of transmission if they want to. And MDU got this authority in 2017 before anyone was really paying attention. Northwestern tried to get this authority to prevent anybody else from building transmission in the state. They tried last session and they failed miserably. And so what we're trying to do with this bill is remove that authority for MDU. Just trying to create competition, the private sector. There's some private entities that are interested in building transmission. So we should make sure that our utilities are not standing in the way of that. So I got to stand up on this bill yesterday with Americans for Prosperity and a couple other very conservative groups on the same side. And that's always a fun day for me. So we'll see what the House Energy Committee does with it. But with any luck, we'll be able to get rid of this right of first refusal throughout the state for our investor-owned utilities. Then the last three here are resolutions. Resolution supporting increased transmission capacity. That bill is in Senate Energy. A resolution to study energy transmission. That one is sitting in House Energy. And then there's another resolution that is looking at studying interstate power grid, interstate power grid system, because ultimately we do not want to be an island. The whole purpose for needing more transmission is so we can be connected to other states and other places where the wind blows and the sun shines, so that we can have energy coming onto the grid that can power, other states and other areas who are having difficulty with their power system, or ultimately, if we have a lot of power in the system, cheaper resources are the ones that get bought up first, and renewable energy is generally the cheaper resource. A good transmission system allows the buying and selling of power over a much wider geographic area, which allows us access to cheaper energy. And generally, that means cleaner energy. So this resolution, this last one, is just trying to figure out what we need to do to have a more interconnected grid with other states. Great idea. We support all three of those resolutions. Next. These bills we've talked about already, but SB 188, the Montana Renewable Energy Association and Northern Plains bill, Solar Shares Act, great idea. But for now, they'd really prefer to continue their inside game and not to have people contacting legislators, not to have people showing up. This is a tricky dynamic, and they're really asking all of us to sit tight and let them try to work some magic and see if they can get this bill through the House. So wish them luck, but don't do anything at the moment on that bill. And then the consumer protection law for solar, just basically it's a 3-day cooling off period. So when somebody comes to your door and sells you a solar system, you have 3 days to say, that wasn't as good a deal. Now that I really look at it and think about it, wasn't as good a deal as that guy told me at my door. It's trying to deal with bad actors in the solar industry. And it's a solar industry bill trying to regulate itself. And then we have this bill again. We've already talked about it. This is provide funding for a regional rail authority. So great bill, contact House Transportation. And the last bill on this page is a bill we oppose, House Bill 122. And it's just giving utilities by default a right-of-way access for gas pipelines. We think it shouldn't be a default. It should be something that is carefully considered. Gas pipelines leak. We know that. We know they leak large volumes over time. It's a very leaky system, and being in the right-of-way, we should make sure that it's not just done as a right, but instead it really does have a rigorous review process. And ultimately, we have to get off gas. We can't continue to give the gas industry this free pass to build a pipeline system that is unsustainable in so many ways. So this shouldn't be an automatic gimme for the utilities. Next. So anti-wind, we had another victory today. There's a bill that Gary Perry from Colstrip has proposed, and his original bill reduced the coal severance tax from 15% down to 10%, so decreased the tax on coal by 1/3. And then it brought the tax on all renewables up to 10%. So the reason we have a tax on coal is because it's a non-renewable resource, and future generations will not have access to that resource for their benefit. So we put this tax on it back in the 70s to make sure that we could build up a fund that would benefit future generations who would no longer have access to that non-renewable resource. So now Gary Perry wants to put a tax on wind and solar. It's punitive. He somehow thinks that we're going to run out of wind, I guess, or run out of the sun. If we do, we're in bigger trouble than this. But he wants to put a tax on those things to really try to prevent them from moving forward and creating competition with his old coal plant. He's decreased the tax on those two things to 2%. And we're still opposed to it. We do think wind needs to pay its fair share, so does solar. But we also think that that's not what this is intended to do. This is very much intended to try to prevent any more development of wind and solar in the state. The bill failed on second reading today on a 50-50 vote, which was great. But it doesn't mean it's dead. I fully expect that he made a motion to reconsider that I didn't hear today. And if he didn't do it today, he'll do it tomorrow. And he's going to try and drum up votes for that. So, stay tuned on that one. And then the other one that's coming in is doubling LC 1260. Hasn't been introduced yet, but it will be any second. This is doubling the property tax rate for wind generation, battery storage, and other energy facilities. And when I mean other energy facilities, I mean kind of everything. And like gas, and I don't think it's coal. Coal is in a different category, but it's a lot of different projects that are going to get their tax rate doubled. And I think that this bill has a very broad constituency of opponents. So I think this bill is going to face some stiff headwinds. I hope it does. So stay tuned on that one. That one hasn't been introduced yet. It's still a bill draft number, but it should be introduced any minute. And then we will probably have a hearing on it next week. Nuclear bills, this is where Nick is at the moment. There's a hearing on both of these nuclear bills. You've heard us talk about them before. I won't go on my soapbox about what a crazy idea nuclear is. Pie in the sky, expensive, just non-existent. I could go on, but I won't. And this first one would allow for the storage of radioactive nuclear waste in Montana. It would allow one facility in the state to take any radioactive nuclear waste from any place else in the state. It's all in state. This bill had an amendment on it that was put on, we got it in the House floor, and that said that there has to be a vote of the county in which the facility would be located, as well as any tribe within 50 miles. And we saw an amendment today in which Gary Perry is proposing to strike that language from this bill in the Senate committee. So we will work hard to maintain that language and try to prevent him from taking out the right to vote on nuclear waste storage in communities. And then the other bill is authorizing the siting of a uranium conversion and enrichment facility in Montana. There's only one of these in the entire United States. And Gary Perry wants the second one to be in Montana out of Colstrip. And we get a lot of our uranium right now from Canada and Australia and Uzbekistan, I think, and Russia. There is some, I think 3% of the uranium in the that we use in the United States currently comes from the United States. So most of it is coming from abroad. And what he wants to do is have all that uranium come into Montana, cross our roads, and be enriched. And then all the waste can be stored out on site, because uranium enrichment does have waste associated with it. So this bill has a hearing today, but I strongly encourage you to contact the Senate Energy Committee. This is an idea that, first off, we can't afford, and second off, we don't deserve. We just don't deserve this. Nobody does. So, and at the very least, everybody deserves a vote in this state on whether we want this type of activity. So we'll keep fighting them. We'll let you know how it goes. But we could use your help. Next slide. I think I talked about this one last week, but HB 240 or 424, which was lowering the property tax rate for the Hardin generating station from 6% down to 0.9%. That was stricken from the bill. The bill was amended heavily earlier this week on the House floor. Super fun to watch that occur. Watch them take out the language that we found most offensive, and watch some Republicans try to protect local government's ability to still tax these things or receive tax revenue from these data centers. So this bill is off our list at the moment. We're monitoring it. If it stays as is, we are fine with it. If it changes back to its, removes any of the amendments, we will let you know, and we will strongly oppose. This other bill, HB 877, just got introduced, and it's a nightmare. This is Northwestern's attempt to short circuit the Public Service Commission oversight of adding 400 megawatts onto its system, or I shouldn't say that, adding 400 megawatts of demand from data centers onto its energy or electricity system that we pay for. And I saw a great article today where in Idaho, there is a huge pushback in their legislature about these data centers owned by Meta and all of these big companies who are moving into Idaho too, and are going to drive up prices. They are going to drive up the cost of electricity because these things are not free. They require transmission infrastructure, they require new generation. And guess who is going to pay for that? It's going to be us. Our bills are going to go up because of these data centers. And they don't have that many jobs. There's one company in Lewistown who does prefabricated buildings for data centers, and they're earning a lot of money right now. So, legislature likes to say, isn't this great for our economy? We have one business that's doing well because of it. But the bottom line is all the rest of us are going to have to pay for Northwestern's Get Rich Quick scheme, which is what this bill is. Just says the PSC has no authority to stop these data centers, stop Northwestern from serving these data centers, and it does not have the authority to protect all existing customers. That's what this bill does. In short, it says the Public Service Commission cannot protect existing customers from increased data center load. And we think the law says the exact opposite right now, and that's why Northwestern brought this bill. Terrible bill. If you think your energy bills are high and going higher, just wait. So we're going to push back hard on this. This is a bill by John Fitzpatrick, but it is done for Northwestern. And the last bill, HB 490, is on wildfire liability. This is a bill that got heavily amended in the House. It's Northwestern's bill, and it's the co-op's bill. It was atrocious as introduced. I mean, it was just beyond the pale atrocious as introduced. It shifted all liability from the utilities onto us, the people who are going to suffer through, increased wildfire disasters. The bill was amended. A lot of that language was tempered, but not completely. This bill is still a terrible bill. If you suffer an injury because of a wildfire that was caused by the utility, good luck trying to recover any money from them. It was a great hearing yesterday. There's going to be a lot of amendments on this bill. My thought is we can give this liability protection to the co-ops. They have a different profit motive. They have a different structure for dealing with wildfires, like wildfire planning and mitigation, but not to our investor-owned utilities that are more worried about their shareholders' bottom line than they are about taking care of the system. They just want to escape liability. So I would like to separate out investor-owned utilities like Northwestern and MDU from the co-ops, and have a different liability scheme for each one of those two. And of course, the bill does not discuss at all Northwestern's contribution to the climate crisis, which is fueling these wildfires. So long way to go on that bill. It's in the Senate Judiciary. If you have any capacity, I strongly, strongly urge you to contact Senate Judiciary Committee members. They are going to be taking executive action on this very soon.
All right, before I talk about our rate case webinar in a few weeks, Ben has an update on HB 477 that we forgot to put in the slides.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about it all day today because it got scheduled for a hearing, but I forgot to slip it into the slides when I was double checking all the other dates, et cetera. But House Bill 477 is a bill that will gently phase out polystyrene or styrofoam food containers. It's sponsored by Marilyn Marler of Missoula, and she has done a really impressive job of navigating it through the House side, and she got it passed last week. And it was a very dramatic second reading with another representative standing up and trying to expropriate her bill to do the exact opposite of what it's intended to do. And she managed to stay cool-headed and keep all of the alliances that she's built over time and pass this bill out of the House. So it will have a hearing on 4/7, which is easy to remember because it's House Bill 477. 3 o'clock in Senate Natural Resources. I feel optimistic about us getting it out of that committee, and then we'll see what we can do with the whole Senate. But yep, so thank you, Katie, for putting that in there. And yeah, very exciting. So another cool one to celebrate, and hopefully we can have the same sort of exhibition of the neat stuff going on in Montana of composting and recycling and manufacturing and distribution of these compostable food containers. There's a lot of local economic benefit to making this transition, not to mention, of course, the obvious environmental benefits.
Thanks, Ben. And quick question for you before I also talk about the rate case webinar. What did you mean when you said something like Perry's coal mine?
Perry's coal mine. Well, if I said that, that was a slip. But Gary Perry is an old coal miner. And he spent his career at the at the Colstrip coal mine, the Rosebud coal mine that feeds the Colstrip plant. He lives in Colstrip. And he's spent his career digging coal. So we're overseeing the digging of coal. So that's who he is. And he's a nice guy, but he is desperate to save the town of Colstrip any way he can. And he is convinced that nuclear is the best path forward post coal.
Thanks. And what we have here, we have a Ask the Experts webinar on April 8th at noon, where we're going to be talking to a couple of experts who are testifying in the rate case, as well as having someone from the Rocky Mountain Institute explain some research they just put out about the Colstrip plant and how much money it can save ratepayers if they start to transition to more clean and affordable and reliable energy production. And so that information's on our website. I'll put a link to it in the chat, but it will also be recorded. So if noon doesn't work for you, you'll be able to watch it later. And we hope to see you there. And then as always, here's our team. Here's our contact information. We are currently doing our legislative appeal to support our legislative work. So our donate link is there. It's on our website. It's meic.org/donate. And we super appreciate your support in that way, and also being on this call and sending emails and making calls. It's all part of the movement. And so now I'll stop sharing my screen and we can do some more questions. If you all have questions, you're welcome to come off mute, raise your hands, or put your questions in the chat. We have a question from Gary in the chat. Whatever happened to wind or solar near Colstrip?
Still a thing. Takes a while, and I can tell you the entire wind and solar industry is in a bit of a pinch under the Trump administration. So a lot of projects are stalled out. There are projects that are going away because of Trump's attack on wind and solar. There's nothing else. There's no other way to describe it. But there are projects that are still being proposed in the Colstrip area, and we're hopeful that some of those will survive.
I think Montana Free Press is doing a 4-part article or series of articles about the future of Colstrip that is a deep dive into those questions. I'll see if I can find them and link it.
Any other questions?
Please, when you get an email from Katie on the rate case, share that with your friends. It's really important that everybody understands what Northwestern is really asking for in this rate case. And so these are people that they've been following Colstrip and Northwestern for a very long time. They're really, really smart, and they're going to have a lot of information to impart to help everybody understand better what, the gimmicks, Northwestern's sleight of hands that it's doing in order to get more money out of us.
I think yesterday's reminder email for this event had rate case webinar stuff in it, so you can forward folks that email as well, but we'll send out a couple more. All right, and if there's no other questions, we can go to dinner early. Thanks everybody for being here tonight.
As always,
Thank
thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen.